Well, welcome to the Hot Dish, comfort food for Middle America, although I'm not feeling very comforted. I'm Heidi Heitkamp.
And I'm Joel Heitkamp.
We're going to talk about the election, but we don't want to dwell just on that. We have more for you in this episode. Joel, you were pretty busy again, and thanks for picking up the slack. You had two really interesting interviews. We should share that you spoke with Pete Yoakum, the executive producer of the documentary Odd Hours, No Pay, Cool Hat.
That's right. The documentary is about the lives and families of volunteer first responders across the country. So Pete and I talked about how he made the movie and its ultimate message.
Well, I mean, you and I spent a lot of time with the first responder in our life, and that was our father, who was chief of the volunteer fire department for years. And so I hope that you told people where they can watch this documentary, because I think a lot of people had our experience growing up.
Yeah, and I think Pete alone is definitely worth their time.
Good. You also had a really important conversation with Donovan Archambault. He also wrote a book, Failed Attempt to Kill the Indian. It's based on his own experience, and it's a tribute to his tribal community, and really an important examination of not where we've been, but also where we're going. So good on you, Joel.
You know, it really was, Heidi, a true honor, especially for November, which is American Indian Heritage Month. But before we get to that, Heidi, tell me what you think of the election of Donald Trump and the Republican gains in Congress.
Well, disappointment, I think, would be a good response. Disappointment that Kamala Harris and her team and a number of Democrats didn't do better. But, Joel, I think hope is a terrible thing sometimes to have, because it will overwhelm your rational thinking. And my rational thinking was you can't have right track, wrong track numbers the way the administration had right track, wrong track numbers and expect to win. And probably the only person she had a chance of defeating was Donald Trump. And so, in some sad way, it's tragic that the Republicans didn't have, let's say, a more conventional candidate, because now we have 4 years of leadership that we've seen before. And I've been watching, and you've been watching some of the appointments to cabinet positions, people who I think will lead with not knowledge and facts, but ideology. And so elections have consequences. But the worst thing for the Democratic Party is to assume that this was some kind of good housekeeping seal of approval on Donald Trump. I think Democratic Party has to look in the mirror and examine why that party, which we say is the party of working people, can't seem to get working people to vote for him.
Well, I think that's a perfect example, Heidi, of why, the hot dish in one country is so important, because I think that we always mention Middle America, but it goes deeper than that. They have forgotten, and I wrote a blog about this. I hope people go and read it.
Where can they read your blog?
They can read it at kfgo.com. But I think lost in all of this is that the Democratic Party no longer talks to me. And I'm going to give you a couple examples, Heidi. They no longer talk to an individual that is worried when deer hunting opens up. They no longer talk to a guy that owns shotguns and rifles and, grew up in an era where, pickups still matter and actually still lives in that era. They no longer talk to a guy who's more worried about what time the football game starts than what time commentary is on MSNBC. I really believe that they don't care about people that haven't graduated college and might be willing to wake up with a hangover. I mean, these people, Heidi, don't matter to the Democratic Party anymore. I mean, that's part of what I talked about in my blog, that it's not sexy to talk about, the sewer pipe. It's not. But the truth of the matter is, on Christmas morning, it better work when the house is full of people. And, the sewer pipe and the sewer system is brand new, or going to be brand new, because of what Joe Biden did. But nobody talked about that. Nobody did. What I heard over and over and over again were issues that didn't connect with those men and women that really come from the same background that you and I grew up with, Heidi. It was just such an intellectual, I don't know how to put it. Let me put it this way. Snobbery.
Elite.
How's that? Is that a word?
Elitist, yeah. Yep, it sure is.
Well,
And it's elite. The message tends to be elite. And I also think, though, that, let's give her some credibility. She stepped in really late. I think, we at least believed she had a chance. But at the end of the day, there also is, for some reason in this country, there may be a bigger hurdle than what we care to admit for a woman, especially a woman of color, to get elected the chief executive.
no, there's no question. I have 5 granddaughters, and I wrote a note to them right off after the election of what they're up against in this world, being girls now and future women that I have no doubt are going to be leaders at some point. The fact is, it's harder for them. It's going to be harder for them. I agree with you. We have to give her credit. It was not her fault. She got thrown into the third end of the pool without much time to really convey what the strategy was going to be. But that doesn't change the fact that the party has been here for a long time. If you look at who won, Joe Biden won. He beat Donald Trump, albeit narrowly, but he beat him. And why? Because he knows how to talk to the very people that I just mentioned. He does. He can walk in the VFW hall. He can walk in the Legion Hall and feel comfortable. He can walk in that Union Hall and know exactly how they live and what got them to wear all of those stickers on their helmet, right? I mean, I don't think that Kamala Harris can do that. I don't think many of the people that lead the Democratic Party can do that.
So let's give people some bright news. We have said at One Country, we've done numbers basically saying that there isn't a lot of split ticket voting. And there wasn't a lot of split ticket voting here, but there was some. And that's how Tammy Baldwin, that's how Slotkin, that's how Gallegos, that's how Jackie Rosen. I mean, you go down the line, split ticket voting delivered at least 4 additional senators. And then there were senators who couldn't overcome that headwind. And that's John Tester, who actually, I think of all the senators running, probably did the best in terms of overcoming the headwind. It just was so that the gale was too strong in Montana. Sherrod Brown obviously wasn't able to overcome the headwind. And tragically, and they're all tragic, Bob Casey wasn't able to get it across the finish line. And so we lost 3 great incumbent senators, didn't have any pickups, and then lost Joe Manchin, which means that there now is a 3-vote majority for the Republican Party in the United States Senate. How do people who are listening to us, how do they get their sense across of frustration that they have with the direction of the party?
Well, I think many of them are going to look at different ways they can get politically active. And that isn't going to be necessarily through the party. And I'm sorry to say that, but it's not going to be. The other thing is, and what I'm hearing from people here in the middle of this country is, I quit. I'm sorry, but that's what they're saying is, I quit. I'm hearing it on my show. I'm hearing it from a lot of people. So they're talking about doing exactly what we need to not do. But they are talking about it because in One Country territory, they're wore out, Heidi.
Yeah, but admit it, Joel, didn't you want to say, I'm done, I quit?
I went media blackout is what I did.
Hey, by the way, I saw the cookies. I saw the dinner rolls. You could have sent me a few cookies.
For those listeners out there, I'm convalescing by taking up baking. I'm done raising pumpkins now. And so I've baked cookies and dinner rolls in the last couple of days. But I mean, here's the truth. If you want to sit there as a person and say, look, these people, the Trump people, get to define me, then fine, quit. Then quit. But and I'll use the scenario of dad again, right? Go ahead, quit. Go home. You don't got to play anymore, but you're going to miss playing ball. I mean, we're about to find out how vicious this all can be. And we're going to. We're absolutely going to. And so if you just want to sit back and watch, sit back and watch. But I think in the middle of this country, what the leader, whoever that future leader is, needs to call people from the middle of this country and say, come talk to me. I need to talk to you.
I was in a cab on the way back from New York doing television for almost 36 hours straight. And, I I put on the happy face, Joel, and, I was ready to not be happy face. And the cab driver felt so bad for me. He got out and gave me a hug. He's Nigerian. And I hadn't cried until then. And he was Nigerian and immigrant, told me how hard he works, told me that he too had cried. And then he said, but never forget this. This is the most wonderful, beautiful country in the history of the world. And it really took kind of that calibration. And I thought, okay, you could quit. You can sit on the sidelines, but you're going to get the same result. And this administration now has to govern. I want to take a picture of the price of eggs. I want to take the picture of a price of a loaf of bread. And then every week say, hasn't come down yet. Here's the picture. A lot was promised. I don't know how he can possibly deliver the kind of bread and butter, meat and potatoes, or macaroni and cheese promises that were made. I don't think it's going to happen. And, the accountability that we can, in fact, be responsible for, because that is the job of the opposition party. The accountability is a huge part of, hopefully, the strategy.
Well, but I would add this. I agree with your Nigerian friend, or your new Nigerian friend. I agree with him. This is a great country. I don't dispute that. But what we also found out about this country is we're not that different than other countries. I mean, we're not. I know that sounds negative. I don't care. It's something we need to take a step back and ask ourselves how we fix. Because what we found out was we could elect an individual where it doesn't matter if eggs go up under his watch. It only mattered if eggs went up under the previous watch. And until the American people can get done idolizing someone like him, we're not going to move forward. And I've got one more point to make, Heidi. On my show, when I say, because the majority of my audience is Republican, very, very conservative Republican, when I say to them, look, this is the man that you want your kids to emulate. This is the man that you are proud to have as president and that you love. My phone lines light up. They just light up.
They say that's not what I bet you they're all really defensive. Nope.
Yeah. Nope. I just like his policies. I don't care much for him. You do care for him because he's going to be that Grover Cleveland face above the blackboard.
Yeah.
Now, there is no blackboard anymore, I realize, but those little circle pictures that were above that blackboard in Mrs. Stack's room matter to me. And you know what? They just elected a convicted rapist felon. And it doesn't matter what eggs are to these guys. It matters whether or not they get to be close to him and whether or not they get to be as cool as him. And so, Heidi, we proved that we can be a country no different than many other countries. And that doesn't mean I don't love this country.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, Joel, it's always fun. We're going to continue to be here and we're going to continue to talk and we're going to continue to be a voice for real America. So this isn't the last conversation, but we're going to move forward from here and listen to Joel and Donovan.
This is a real honor for me, ladies and gentlemen. I get a chance to visit with Donovan Archambault. He is a tribal member born in Fort Belknap, Montana. Now, you can't just easily go through his resume or his life, quite frankly. He went to Harvard, holds a Master's of Education degree, served as director of the Tribal Health Department, later as Tribal Planning Department. But here's one for you, folks. 16 years on the Tribal Council, including 2 as chair. We're going to talk to him about his book, Tatanga Hokshin, A Failed Attempt to Kill the Indian is the name of the book. It's a work of fiction, but unfortunately, there's just a lot of truth in it. Donovan Archambault, thank you for joining us, sir. It's a real honor.
Thank you for having me, sir. I hope I can add some things to what happened to us in boarding schools and things that they need to talk about.
You bet. They do. And clearly, by reading some of the excerpts of the bill, or the book, I should say. They do need to talk about it. Now, the plot of this book is about a 10-year-old that was forced into the Pierre Indian School in South Dakota, a government institution, with one goal, and that was to kill the Indian, save the man. What does that mean, Mr. Archambault?
Well, it means just that we had to make a drastic change in our whole culture, religion, our whole lifestyle. And what it's done to us is evident today in all these social ills and the high statistics of Indian alcoholism, drug abuse, suicide, and things like that. And I didn't even know the word suicide. Never even heard of it before I went to boarding school. And not that boarding school is a direct result of it, but it shows that it possibly could be.
So the U.S. Department of the Interior has identified 408 government-backed Indian schools in 37 states over 150 years. I grew up right next to one of those in the Sistan-Wahpeton Lakota tribe. The schools forced children to have English names and work manual labor. Did that actually happen to you as well, Donovan?
Well, that happened to us before I went down there. I had my English name, but living with my grandfolks, my name was Tatangahoshi. That's what I answered to. So I had a home name and a school name when I started school. But my name was already Donovan Archambault when I went to Pierre.
So really, the name you use in the book is your name. I realize this is a work of fiction, but it certainly is patterned after your life. I want people to understand that are taking in this conversation what that was like, what the book not just portrays, but actually did happen, if you would, sir.
Well, I would say that probably 90% of the things that I write about actually happened. They happened to myself, and in some instances, I didn't remember the person's name, and so I kind of inserted other names or my own name in things that happened. But the actual events, the things that I write about, actually happened. There was some things I had to kind of fill in because I didn't remember the exact details of how it actually happened. Or I was there, but I wasn't in the immediate location where it actually happened. And I heard some of the events that happened from my friends and from other matrons, teachers, and things like that.
With your background as an educator, as someone so highly educated, as somebody who worked within the tribe to try to make lives better, I guess I got to ask you this. How many people do you think know what you're writing about here?
Well, I believe other than the tribal members and the students that I went to school with, I think very little of the greater population know these things actually happened. I know we tried to tell other people, but we were labeled liars or fabricators or something that, no, this really didn't happen. And I went to Carlisle in 1990 and sat on a panel discussing things that happened there. And on that panel, there was a priest, myself, some historian, reporter, and a teacher. There was 5 of us on the panel. And I mentioned the fact that, yeah, there was abuse, sexual abuse. And the priest who was on the other end of the table from me stood up and looked directly at me and said, "Now that can't be true because our people aren't like that." And I told him, "Father, why are you calling me a liar? I don't let anybody call me a liar. And if you don't apologize, I'm coming down there." And of course, he apologized. The colonel sat me back down. And I came home after that. And 3 weeks later, or a month later, 3-inch headlines in the Boston Globe: "Priest molest altar boys," and all hell broke loose. I reported that in 1951, but it had no consequences except me getting beat up because I said something about the priest, and it didn't sit well with the administration, and I was punished for that.
I want to talk to you about the way you chose to tell this story through fiction. Why did you choose fiction to tell this? Basically, it's a true story.
Well, basically, I didn't remember a lot of the names. I didn't remember the exact times, the dates. I didn't remember exactly from one year to the next because they all kind of ran together. There was no break. There was no going home, no listening to your grandparents, no listening to your parents. My parent down there was a whistle. The whistle blew at 6 o'clock. You jump up, make your bed. Whistle blew again. You lined up. You done your exercise. Whistle blew again. You went to dining hall at 8. Whistle blew again. You lined up, went to school. Whistle blew again. And so that was my parenting experience at Pier. And so, we really didn't have any kind of direction except do what we tell you. We marched every place 2 by 2 to school, to the dining hall, to church, to wherever we went. And it was based on military practice on how we were taken care of.
How did you get into the school? What was the reason that, I don't know if I should use the word enrolled or placed, or how did you get into the school, Mr. Archambault?
My mother and father separated, and we were more or less orphaned. My mother still cared for us, did the best she could, but although there was about 6 or 7 of us still at home. So we had a choice. We either had to go to boarding school or we had to go to a foster home. And one of my uncles wanted to keep me anyway. And the social services here at the Bureau wouldn't allow it because he already had 5 or 6 kids of his own. So I had, like I said, I had a choice of foster home or Pier. So I chose Pier because I heard all the wild stories about foster homes and how the kids were treated. And so I chose boarding school.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Donovan Archambault, a member of the Assiniboine tribe. His new book is just absolutely amazing. It basically something that is focused on a failed attempt to kill the Indian. You talked about suicides, but one of the points, as you look at it, the U.S. Department of the Interior identifying those 408 government-backed Indian schools in 37 states over 150 years, they talk about hundreds of children dying in these schools, hundreds dying.
I actually had a couple of my family members that went to Pier actually commit suicide. One shot herself, and the other one just drank himself to death, broken artery somewhere and bled to death, leaning over a toilet bowl. That's how he died. But he stayed drunk almost his whole life. And to me, alcoholism is suicide. Once you start that and you don't get away from it, it's going to kill you. And that's suicide to me. I stayed drunk for 25 years, trying to wash away the shame and the anger that we acquired going to school.
I want to talk about people recognizing and basically respecting your life and others that you write about in this book. I want to talk, if we can, a little bit about testifying and publicly sharing, because clearly that's what you're doing here. Is there responsibility there, sir?
Definitely. I think the responsibility is with the federal government is if you can teach us all these things that have brought us to where we're at now, then we can unlearn those kind of things and get back on the right track. In my class, I teach my students, we're sitting on a fence now, a fence here, the old way and the new way. The old way, we had respect, discipline, we respected our parents, we never answered back. The new way, we're alcoholics, drug addicts, and we know that didn't work for us. So we have an opportunity, and I think it falls on everybody, from the parents to Congress to wherever. We have to begin to teach the values that made us who we are in the beginning. That's what I'm trying to teach. I'm trying to say we need to go back to when your parents tell you to go wash dishes, is go wash dishes.
What as a society do we need to do?
I think the society had an opportunity to look at what was going on from the very beginning. But there's only one man that I read about. He's my favorite artist, and that's C.M. Russell. In one of his books, he drew a picture of an Indian sitting in the shade of his horse. And the caption under that picture was, "The red man is the true American. He is almost gone now. The earth was his mother, the sun was his God, and all outdoors was his Bible, and he knew every page." But he's the only one that seen us like that, and nobody heard him.
Mr. Archambault, this has been a real honor. Donovan Archambault, Sr., I would say it's safe to say you found your purpose, sir. Thank you for joining us on One Country.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to talk to Pete Yoakum about his documentary film, Odd Hours, No Pay, Cool Hat. 5 years ago, he began a project focusing on volunteer firefighters and the risks they take for their communities, especially rural America, and that's daily. In his movie, he dives deep into the lives and families of volunteer first responders spread across the country. And Pete began this film as a personal quest to find the answers to the question, why would anybody do it? Why would somebody put themselves in harm's way while leaving their job and family to respond to a neighbor's emergency with little or no pay? Pete, thanks for joining me on The Hot Dish.
Appreciate it, Joel.
You know, I'm just going to be upfront with you, Pete. All I saw was the trailer, but after seeing the trailer, I'm going to see it. I'm going to see the work because what you just showed is really the world I live in.
Well, it's worth it. You'll be able to see it on some of the PBS stations coming up here soon, but you can also download it in the full original version from Apple, from Amazon Prime. You can even get it on airplanes for longer flights.
Something started this up. Something got in your head. Why the project? Now, let me make sure you know the name of it, folks. Odd Hours, No Pay, Cool Hat, which, by the way, in and of itself is a cool name, Pete. But something made you do this. What was it?
I wanted to find a project that would allow me to prove to myself that Americans are a lot more similar than politicians and social media channels would have us believe. So I began looking for Americans that were contributing something very significant to our society, but who weren't very well known or recognized for that contribution.
Okay. Well, how did you pick them? Because you and I both know there are so many individuals out there that fit the criteria of the story you're trying to tell. I mean, something made you decide which ones were going to be the focus. What made you pick them?
I had a hunch that I'd end up focusing on volunteer first responders. I did a lot of due diligence and research and realized, unlike the career fire departments where, Hollywood makes movies that are drama movies, there is very little that was told about the volunteer first responder sector. So first, I set off sort of driving around the country with one of my retrievers and started looking for that project. My wife, understandably, did not know what the hell I was doing nor why. And eventually, I found my way to Hoxie, Kansas, where I met Steve Hirsch, who's one of the most extraordinary people that I've met in my life. He's been a volunteer firefighter for 44 years. He serves as the chairman of the National Volunteer Fire Council. He's a prosecutor for several of the rural counties in Northwest Kansas. He prepares 1,500 tax returns for his neighbors each year. He's a very, very productive guy, and we hit it off almost instantly. After I told him about my project, he just essentially opened up the book for me in terms of contacts, of ideas, associations with the National Volunteer Fire Council. And initially, you're right, this started out as a personal quest to answer that question. But after I started visiting with hundreds of volunteer first responders, I realized that this was a far bigger project than what I had originally imagined. The public is just generally unaware of them, and they constitute more than 2/3 of all U.S. firefighters. the economic contribution to our population is enormous, and it's especially critical, as you say, to those areas that they can't afford a full-time fire service.
Pete, I don't want to say recovering because, I loved it, but I'm a former rural firefighter. I lived in a town and I worked out of a town with 100 people in it. When that whistle went off, and that's how we knew, the whistle blew in that small town, everybody came running. But that's small in comparison to my dad. My dad was rural fire chief for 30 years. And one of the things that both Heidi and I cherish the most is that badge, that fire chief badge. There's a lot of pride to that. And I think in large part because of the volunteerism. It isn't just fighting fire or fighting that accident or getting the ambulance there, those type of things. And so, all of that is challenges. For you to tell that story had to be challenging. I mean, what were you faced with while you went about being in a rural area and telling a story that very few people know in urban areas?
I won't call it challenging because I found it one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my life. A lot of those interviews were done during COVID, so that was kind of a challenge. I purchased a Sprinter van, fully self-contained, and drove around and visited these places that were, Trails End sort of places in many cases. But I was just so welcomed and well received. The challenge is really, in filming this, first, raising the money. But second, I took my library of interviews and took 10 minutes of them out, turned it into what I call like the pitch video, and went out to a list of about 100 different U.S. corporations where I thought this would be received well. But I ended up getting through to John Deere and realized that I had found the needle in the haystack there because John Deere himself had been a volunteer firefighter when he started John Deere. So that part sort of took care of itself. But then when we went out and we did a casting call with the assistance of the National Volunteer Fire Council, we got 900 responses when we were expecting 50. So originally we were going to do 3 venues around the country, but when we got these responses, which were just heartwarming, we went to John Deere and they said, well, let's just increase the scope of the project. So we went to 8 different venues, eventually dropping 1, but it did expand the project significantly and the budget. So John Deere was extremely generous as they helped us through this process.
When you do a piece like this, there's going to be some people that you instantly think of, that you think this story of this person has to be told.
They're all, to your point, they're big-hearted and generous and so forth. I guess I would say my favorite is Barbara Williams. Barbara was 62 or 3. Her husband retired and she went into the local fire department there in Little Fork, Virginia, and wanted to be, a secretary, a bookkeeper, accountant. And they said, no. And now she's the head EMT for the fire department, and she's been there for 11 years. And she was generous enough to allow me to pull into her home and hook a power cord up so I could stay there. But we sat, for hours and hours and hours before the film crew arrived, talking about her situation there and what experience she had.
Pete, in my time as a rural firefighter, it was all men. That was just the custom. And then, you know what? It happened not just because of fairness. Actually, it happened because some of the rural fire departments were running out of people to be members and to do that. And then they went to a place they should have gone a long time ago, which was to recruit women to join that force. And to me, I always thought they found out, and I'm fairly confident I'm right about this, that why the hell did we have them on the force earlier?
My prediction is that half of the recruits that we generate will be women.
Yep. And it makes for nothing but a better firefighting department. Pete, I know I keep going back in time here, but the one reason I do that is to emphasize, what you found and how that's changed, how professional it is now. And I still have this image of my dad running and my mom worried about what he's going to come back like. I mean, they were going to a place that's incredibly dangerous.
Absolutely.
I think that people don't realize that. They appreciate the fact that firefighters are out there on the front line, but many of these individuals that are volunteering are going through the same anxiety, for lack of a better way of putting it. If somebody's in that house, they're going to go in that house and get them. And so I'm curious what that person that was involved with the firefighter, whether it was the husband or the wife, did you get a chance to visit with them?
Oh, absolutely. I interviewed a lot of spouses of firefighters and asked them the same question. I can't overemphasize the notion that these volunteer fire departments, they become a family for the individuals who join them, and their support system is very strong. And so that extends just way beyond just the firefighter. It extends to their family and everything else.
Well, Pete, I only have 182. I was sitting here counting 182 other subjects I want you to do documentaries on now. that I think in some of the rural areas, the stories need to be told. But is there anything else? Is there anything else that you want to tell the listeners of One Country?
Just keep the faith.
Oh, Pete, thank you for doing this. I really look forward to it. And I can tell you this, if it does nothing else, giving those individuals the honor that they deserve and the gratitude they deserve is awesome. We've been hearing from a number of you, and we'll be getting your questions in the next episode of The Hot Dish. Remember, you can email us at podcast@onecountryproject.org. That's podcast@onecountryproject.org.
Well, Joel, thank you for not making me feel better today. But thank all of our listeners for joining us. The Hot Dish is brought to you by One Country Project, making sure the voices of the rest of us are heard in Washington. Learn more at onecountryproject.org. We're going to be back in 2 weeks with more Hot Dish comfort food for Middle America.